Hello everybody and welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe.
And my name is Billy.
How's it going? How's life?
Life is busy, but also very, very positive. And we are in the full swing of awards season, which is my favourite time of the cinematic year because you get to discuss all sorts of, predictions, what your personal favourites are, how, politics and the wider industry landscape might affect people's voting choices for the Oscars and the Golden Globes and the Emmys, and how the winners and the nominees of yesteryear compares to how the landscape is looking this year.
This is also Billy's busiest time of year because he has to get round and watch all of these award-nominated films in time.
Absolutely. I am scouring those nomination lists and already just a lot of my viewing diary and viewing habits and viewing plans is dictated by, what is hot out at the festival circuit, what is getting tipped early for awards, so I can get ahead, and it means I'm not having to watch the entire Best Picture lineup 2 weeks before the ceremony, because that can get a little bit hectic, even for somebody as productive as on viewing as me. So
Billy
yes,
awake
very
at
busy.
2 a.m. with crazy eyes and I can just picture it now.
As if I don't do that already.
Yeah, that's true. Our reviews today are going to be Mean Girls, Society of the Snow, Saltburn and Good Grief. But before we get on to any of that, I've got a new segment for us, Billy.
Oh, hit me with it.
So, the segment is called This Day in Film History, where I am going to give you some facts about what happened on this very day. It's currently Sunday, the 21st of January 2024, but what happened on this day in film history in years gone by. And I've got a weird combination for today.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
On this day in film history, in 1982, Shaolin Temple, a martial arts film, was released, and it was among the first major co-productions between Hong Kong and mainland China. And it was the first to be filmed in mainland China with a mostly mainland cast.
That's great. And I also have a funny feeling that maybe it's a different strain of Chinese or Japanese films that this refers to. But there's, do you know the rap group, the Wu-Tang Clan?
Yeah.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, any listeners, I'm a huge 90s rap music fan, and the Wu-Tang Clan makes a lot of their mythos and sound effects and stuff in their music is references the Shaolin and the Shoguns and the kung fu and martial arts films from Chinese and Japanese cinema of decades gone by. And just when you said Shaolin Temple, I was like, oh my god, Wu-Tang.
Maybe it is an actual temple, it is an actual place, so maybe they were referring to the actual place rather than the 1982 smash hit.
Well, they actually include samples from old kung fu and martial arts films. Whether or not it's actually Shaolin Tempo is another matter. But
Billy, you need to do a quick fact check while I give you my second fact. Do you want to get on the Google and see if you can find out if the Wu-Tang Clan?
I am.
Use some sound effects from Shaolin Temple. He's scouring the web as we speak.
Oh, I am.
While Billy is doing that, I want to tell you my second fact about what happened on the 21st of January, and this time it was in 1996. Nicolas Cage won a Golden Globe for leaving Las Vegas.
Oh, one of his only legitimately great performances ever. And still, managing to be kind of very Nick Cage and kind of how explosive and, strange it's, kind of he has these very sort of zany laughs and sort of darts at the eyes and everything when he's sort of intoxicated and sort of in the throes of his alcoholism, his character. But he still manages to give that performance real heart and real emotional heft and shows sort of the very sort of slow and sort of protracted breakdown of this man. He ended up going on to win an Oscar for it, and
yeah, he did. Yeah,
it's a very depressing film, but a very, very a very human one, and I think one that, I mean, considering the Las Vegas setting and how sort of debauched a lot of decadent and lavish and, extravagant a lot of films about Vegas are, that one really gets to kind of the grit and the grime kind of underneath, and the seediness underneath the surface of it all. So yes, Leaving Las Vegas, not a light watch, but a very good one, and with a really great central Nicolas Cage performance. And I think, with Dream Scenario and Adaptation and Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent and Mandy, I think there is evidence that the man can act. He likes to give it to us sparingly.
Are you telling me that Nicolas Cage's greatest acting performance isn't Acting High with Pedro Pascal? Because I'd like to differ. that was one of the most entertaining performances I've ever seen from Sir Nicolas Cage.
That may give Leaving Las Vegas and the Oscar win some competition. I do have to admit
I think so. I think so, just for the memes alone of
Indeed.
Pedro's little high face.
Just in the back of the car, tipped back. Incredible scenes. On the topic of Shaolin and the Wu-Tang, there are many Shaolin and Wu-Tang 10 Tigers of Kwangtung, the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, Executions from Shaolin. There's like a bunch, Snake and Crane Arts of Shaolin. There's a bunch of late 70s and early 80s martial arts films with Shaolin or Dragon or Temple in the title that the Wu-Tang Clan have sampled in their earlier albums. So
incredible.
It's a part of hip hop history, and it's a significant part of movie history. Double whammy.
Incredible. Well, those were my 2 facts for today. If you want to know what happens tomorrow, it's the A-Team with Mr. T was first aired. So, when this is released, just remember it's the anniversary of an absolute legendary TV series.
Do you know I've never seen a single episode of the A-Team?
Disgraceful. You didn't catch it on reruns or anything?
No, I don't think to be fair, I don't think I've ever seen it like rerun on TV, like in the TV guide or anything. So I don't think I've stumbled upon an opportunity to watch it. But then again, I've never sought it out.
You have to go into the deep channels, the rubbish ones, the ones that have 200 adverts before you get a minute of the actual show. That's where you need to look.
Movies for men.
Yeah, it'd be something like that. It'd be like Lad Movies 200 or something like that.
That's my homework. That's my mission for next week. I've got to watch an episode of the A-Team and report back to you.
Please do. I want to know everything. I want a full-blown... Actually, I want a reaction on the Instagram, please, Billy. I want live updates on you watching an episode of the A-Team.
Let's see if I love it or hate it. Or somewhere in between.
Okay, so moving on, let's talk a little bit about awards season. We had our big This Is Billy's top 10 films of the year in our last episode, and within that we had quite a few that are within the awards circuit this season. Golden Globes, Oscars, BAFTAs, they all tend to have their own kind of agendas, but there's usually a couple of films, the big heavy hitters that are across every single one of them and kind of drown out the rest of the noise. So today I wanted to have a little bit of a chat about award season trends in general and what kind of trends and what these trends say about us, about the film going public and the critics at this point in time. And I'm going to start off with saying that there are only 4 films in existence who have won 10 or more Oscars. Can you guess what they are?
Well, I know there are 3 that are tied for 11. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, Titanic, and Ben-Hur.
Correct.
I can't remember the one that's won 10, and I think I'll kick myself when you tell me.
It's a musical. Does that help?
Oh, is it West Side Story?
It is. Well done.
Damn, yes.
Yeah, West Side Story's on 10, and then the rest are on 11.
Controversial opinion, I really like West Side Story. I think it's a bit overrated in the annals of cinema. I don't think it's a masterpiece, but it is very enjoyable.
I love West Side Story, but I do think it's Romeo and Juliet. It is just Romeo and Juliet, and I'm not the biggest fan of Romeo and Juliet. So, I mean, if you're not loving that kind of story, it's not going to be your favourite, is it? But the music is Mwah, I'm doing a chef's kiss. You can't see me. It's a podcast, but just vision. Imagine that. You've been having a look at some previous Oscar winners. Can you talk us through like some of the previous Best Picture winners and see if they've got anything in common?
Well, we had, I was absolutely ecstatic to see Everything Everywhere All at Once, a totally crazy, out of this world, multiverse, genre hopping, family drama, but sci-fi action epic take home Best Picture, during that year. It just felt like, the Academy were finally, bowing to the superior film, despite it kind of breaking all the traditional, stuffy historical drama conventions that have permeated the Oscars in the past. And that was a real breath of fresh air. As much as I like Coda from one of the other previous years, and that was an amazing win for representation, that's a wonderful film in a lot of ways, even if I think parts of the narrative are quite generic, to the slight detriment of the overall story. That was a really wonderful moment for representation in deaf cinema, even if I don't think it was one of the best films in that category. It's hard to be that annoyed about it because it is so heartwarming, so moving, and such a positive decision in the eyes of representation. Sorry,
just that wasn't Coda based on a previous film, like a German film?
Perhaps. It one adapted screenplay, so it is based off a previous work. I'm not sure if that's a novel or a previous film.
I've got a feeling it's like a foreign... I'll have to look this up. I've got a feeling it's an international film because there was a bit of controversy about it at the time where it was basically like this film's won the Oscar, whereas the original didn't quite get the recognition it deserves, even though it's in the same category. So an interesting thing maybe to bear in mind about that one.
It's an adaptation of a French-Belgian film called La Famille Bélier. Apologies if I've butchered that pronunciation, but that's from 2014. And yes, you want the previous and initial sort of inception of the story to be the one that's rewarded. You don't necessarily want a potentially sanitized repackaging of that story to get the major awards contention. But if it does mean that, a story about, very deserving and very hardworking, very vibrant, deaf people gets a lot of notoriety and awards consideration, then that isn't a total loss in my book. Then we had I believe we watched it together at uni, the historic Parasite Oscar win, the first foreign film ever in history. Where a bunch of us uni friends all stayed up live to watch it, and we all went, we're watching a historical moment. We were basking in history being made that morning.
Quite a lot of alcohol might have been consumed at that time as well, but that didn't, not to take away from the absolutely monumental moment that it was.
Yes. So I do think the Academy has been making a lot of very positive and very kind of forward-thinking decisions that aren't necessarily always pandering towards representation, but are picking, for the most part, the most solid and deserving films. And I think the Best Picture lineup this year is, again, it's continuing that trend of a bit of traditional, as I think is perfectly fine, but also, again, really forward-thinking, really varied work.
I've been having a look a little bit about trends in some of the current films that are, going around the award circuit. A few interesting ones. I mean, I've tried to write them down in categories for different kinds of representation. Once again, the representation with people of colour is probably one of the smallest categories, which seems to be a bit of a trend. We've got, of course, as an American Fiction, American Symphony, The Colour Purple, which isn't out in the UK yet, and The Creator, which was a sci-fi, which I'm quite interested. I think that's just dropped on Disney Plus, and I will be giving that a little look. I heard some mixed things about it kind of being a bit too Star Wars-esque, but I'm intrigued that it's been getting a bit of awards buzz about it. I remember there was quite a bit of buzz when it came out. But in general, that kind of representation is still not quite where it needs to be. And it's interesting to look at the kind of films with Black representation or different ethnicities, the kind of stories that are getting the awards attention, they all tend to be kind of films about race, which I find quite interesting, other than The Creator, which I think is sci-fi, but again, I've not seen it. But American Fiction, American Symphony, and The Colour Purple are kind of, they're black films, but they're also about race subject matter, or about like historical implications on race and people coming to America, especially American Fiction, which again, I think that's just about to come out in the UK, but looking at the synopsis, it seems really interesting, not to take away from the films themselves, but I do find it interesting that outside of this category, the kind of films that are doing well, we're still not seeing a lot of diversity, not diversity in terms of representation or diversity within storytelling, like diversity within diversity, if you know what I mean. And I think that's kind of a trend that I've seen throughout this year.
We spoke about, when I was listing off my best films of the year last week, one of the things I loved most about Rye Lane was the fact that it was a British sitcom, British romantic comedy that had two black leads that again didn't have any. And this was I was not alone in this sentiment. I saw this echoed online and between friends of mine who saw the film. It didn't have really any plot concern or focus on the race of the lead actors. It was kind of just, they were existing as characters within this very kind of diverse and multicultural setting of, South London that the film takes place in. Why couldn't, I think that film has been awarded by the Biffers. And also, another Critics' Choice and Golden Globes and potential Oscar contender, Coleman Domingo's performance in Rustin, where he plays the man who sort of helmed and organized the big march in Washington, D.C., where Martin Luther King would deliver his famed I Have a Dream speech. And, wonderful performance, really important story that should be told. And he was also a gay black man. So that's, an extra layer of representation on that. But again, it has the sort of the makeup with the very rousing music and again, a black story, focused on race. And great that these stories are being told, but when we see a film like Past Lives, which has really great Asian American representation in sort of this story about people traveling away from their country and then sort of reconnecting with their past life and reckoning with their decisions now. Again, there is a cultural element to that, but it's not sort of pervasive. It's not sort of all consuming of the story. Why can't we have, I'm sure there was something like, Earth Mama that I had an honorable mention for last week, an American independent film that has a very diverse cast but again is more focused on sort of social systems and, flawed and impoverished areas that are making it difficult for mothers to raise their children in America. So I think there were definitely contenders that could have been selected this year that have diverse casts, but doesn't necessarily focus on, oppression or prejudice or have plots sort of adjacent to that. I think, there's definitely room for diverse stories that, have more complex views of their characters and the ethnicities of their characters and how they sort of fit within society.
Definitely. And I think that's great that you just called attention to some really great films that maybe aren't getting the same amount of awards buzz as we think that they deserve. That's what your list was for, but I'd recommend to check that out. But I don't know. I think it's great that these films exist, but they're not at the forefront, and we need to be championing them a little bit more, I think, within our kind of film awards culture. The same can be said for LGBT representation. We have had quite good representation this year, but I would say that it's still very heavily sided on gay men. Got All of Us Strangers, Maestro, Saltburn, very different movies. All of them
Why
incredibly
not
different
Bottoms?
movies. Oh no, well,
Bottoms.
But Bottoms, is Bottoms going to win any awards? This is what I'm saying.
No, but what I was saying was, why not have it considered?
Exactly. Well, I would say, I think comedy especially doesn't get the awards buzz that a lot of the time it deserves as a genre. It usually gets snubbed a bit. I do think that Barbie might change that a little bit this year.
Yeah, I think it's really great to see, an on the surface very, sugary and buoyant, blockbuster actually get awards consideration and actually have some really profound things to say about patriarchy and the way men treat women in society and women individuality. And it is really great to see, again, even though Maestro is stylistically the most obviously Oscar baity of the bunch in terms of, it has very, attention grabbing, provocative, stylish camera moves and is very kind of theatrical in some of its presentation. A good half of that story is dedicated to Leonard Bernstein's wife. And, she makes up a very significant part of the story. And I like the fact that we're told that his, success and his affairs and the marriage took on her, wasn't ignored and wasn't sort of pushed to one side. The lead in Past Lives being a woman and having a really introspective, thoughtful woman at the center of that film. That was really wonderful to see her as a lead there and have the focus be on her. Davine Joy Randolph in The Holdovers, playing a sort of complex, grieving but also very strong and very robust black woman in The Holdovers opposite Paul Giamatti, and a really, very out there and very kind of forceful and provocative story, but nonetheless very important one about feminism and sexual liberation in Poor Things. I do think there are sort of, I think Sprinklings is sort of underselling it a little bit, but I do think are examples here in awards season of sort of very interesting and unconventional stories in terms of, cinematic presentation, but also, tackling important issues and maybe moving in some senses in the right way for representation.
It feels like there's less tokenism, which is nice. That there seems to be, it's not just the one film. Do you get what I mean? Like, it's not the musical. It's not the gay film. It's not the black film. That we've had years where it has kind of felt like that there was only really one front runner for
2011.
Each kind of person, Yeah,
definitely.
Whereas this year it feels like more of a scattering. I will say that there's still, a big emphasis on historical dramas led by men, about historical things that happened, and those films all sound like they're good films. I think it depends. I mean, to what extent do you think award season actually reflects what is popular right now? Like, do you think that it's accurate? Do you think that the critics reflect what is being consumed? I'm kind of half and half about it this year.
Yeah, I'm very half and half about it as well. I think, everyone was very excited for Killers of the Flower Moon, and the voice that gave to the Osage people is really, really important. But then again, this is another entry in the career of a strong and introspective entry, and a more emotive and insightful entry, perhaps. But it is made by Martin Scorsese, who's one of the cinematic American titans. And again, Christopher Nolan doing Oppenheimer, which doesn't have the greatest written female characters in the world, to kind of put it mildly. So I do think, there's a bit of friction here between, some really interesting work from a diversity and narrative perspective, but in terms of the people who are helming it, perhaps not, the most diverse or novel choices.
Who would you say, top of your head, just to end the segment, your Best Picture winner for this year?
My Best Picture winner?
Yeah. I think I know what it is.
Oh, Poor Things by an absolute mile.
Really? I still haven't seen it yet. I've heard kind of obviously you've raved about it, but I've also heard some interesting points of view about it that I'm really interested to watch and explore for myself, because I think there's definitely essay material within that one.
There very much is. And I think it will rub some people the wrong way. But, I think great, audacious stories don't please everyone, and that is just fine.
Mine is Barbie. Not just because I had the best time and it has become one of my most used memes. Just on my phone. I use the GIFs all the time. But I just think it's a really strong screenplay. And it wasn't what I expected. I went into the cinema expecting one thing, and I was blown away with what we actually got, and the depth of it, and the emotion of it, and the fact that it was actually a really good film. So I think if I could have a best picture, I don't think it'll do it, but I would absolutely love it to do it, is Barbie.
I wouldn't entirely rule it out.
Mean Girls. Mean Girls is a musical adaptation of the 2000... Is it 2009 or 2004? I've got a feeling it's 2004.
2004.
Yeah, goddamn, we're old. The 2004 original comedy film written and starring in a cameo role, Tina Fey. It's one of my absolute favourite high school movies. And this is a musical reimagining for the modern era. Billy, what did you think of this one?
I've already primed you for what is about to happen.
Billy messaged me saying, get ready for a rant. So I'm bracing myself. I'm turning the noise on my headphones down so I don't bust my ears while you go off on one.
Right.
Yeah.
So before I embark on the odyssey of whining that I will imminently subject you all to, whether you like it or not, I would just like to qualify that I am a fan of the original Mean Girls. A big fan, in fact. I think it's far and away the strongest of that kind of late 90s run and early 2000s run spate of like satirical but also kind of cutesy and buoyant teen comedies like Legally Blonde and 10 Things I Hate About You and Clueless. Of all of those films, I think, Mean Girls is easily the best of the bunch. It's the sharpest in terms of commentary on teen culture. It's the most entertaining on a humour level. And it's, for me, the most vibrantly memorable on a character and performance level. I mean, Lindsay Lohan's character and Regina George, played by, the immortal performance of Rachel McAdams, have, passed into the annals of popular culture, and rightfully so. So I say all this to make it known that I'm a fan of the material, and I went in wanting to like this, having heard not the greatest things, and I really did want to find the good in it and kind of hope the musical format could provide something novel here, because it worked well on Broadway, apparently. But everything about the way they execute the story this time around makes all the famous and iconic scenes and characters ring so unbelievably sour that the experience of sitting through this excruciating quagmire of a teen flick should be labelled an Olympic sport as far as I'm concerned. Because I looked at my watch about 45 minutes in and I really went, oh, Jesus God, there's another hour of this. Help me. Take me now, please. Because, so the film opens with this surreal kind of Steadicam shot sequence that traverses the plains of Africa as our lead character sings about moving away from Kenya. Firstly, I have seen more convincing backgrounds and green screens in episodes of Dora the Explorer. I half expected the cast to break the fourth wall and shout and try and get me to participate Dora style in the middle of the cinema. And secondly, and this is not exclusive to this scene, this goes for the rest of the camera work in the film too. I'm thinking to myself, did the Steadicam op rock up to the set after hammering back 14 Jägermeisters? Because my uncoordinated ass could walk across a tightrope carrying 2 anvils during, a magnitude 4 earthquake, and I would shake less than the camera does in this film. I'm just it's constantly rattling. I'm like, what was this guy or woman getting paid? My God. The tone and the aesthetic is all wrong. The grade is drier than the Sahara Desert, and it's about as colourful as Antarctica. Seriously, who directs a musical to look this dull? All of the original's wry and cheeky and grinning attitude has completely vanished. It's totally devoid from the story here. Then there's the issue of how egregiously the tone causes problems that ripple across the rest of the film, because any exuberance or satirical edge that was enhanced in the original film by this, this very clear creative decision that you were seeing heightened reality. This wasn't supposed to be taken completely seriously. Kind of, I think in the way that Bottoms does. I think Bottoms kind of owes a debt to Mean Girls in that respect. But when you look at this, that whole tone and atmosphere has been sucked entirely from the story. And to the point, and the performances are so painfully half-baked as well. Who knew Regina George could be played this limp and unintimidating? But, everything that's funny and relatable about the story comes across as thunderously flat or howlingly ridiculous and cringeworthy. I'm just watching stuff, I've seen this before in the original film. It worked well there. It is not working in the slightest here, and it's just boring. And as a result, to make matters worse, it makes the more stereotypical performances, of intellectually challenged characters. There's the girl in the plastics who's called the stupid one,
Karen,
or the token gay best. Erin, her, and also the token gay best friend character, who I believe is a new addition to this version of the film.
No, he's in there before.
Oh, is he in there? I'm just. Yeah, it's been a long time. I must be misremembering.
This is Damien. He's too gay to function.
Yes. So obviously, too gay to function in the original film, hilarious, and in the tone of sort of this takedown of suburban, vapid American teen culture. That line hits so well and is so funny. In this, it just comes across as actually quite grossly offensive and stereotypical because it's not hanging and firmly putting its boots enough in that satire mode and format. And that is just a real failing of the film, and I think really works against it. The way it careens from these undercooked, bratty scenes of teen angst and drama to the most head-scratching musical numbers I've seen in quite a long time is a complete mess. There's this one sequence where the choreography has the students dancing and gyrating and guffawing as though they are animals, because the Regina George social ladder situation is being depicted as kind of this waterhole in Africa type situation where all the animals are kind of fighting for sort of supremacy. And, everyone's kind of clambering up trees like monkeys. I'm like, have all of these kids just simultaneously dropped acid and we're just capturing it on camera? Oh my God, what is happening?
Well, I mean, that happens in the original as well. The thing with the original was that it was always kind of from Lindsay Lohan's character's point of view. I mean, I imagine that's the way that they've tried to do it this time as well. But with song and dance numbers, that doesn't quite work. Even if you're trying to do it from the main character's point of view, if you have a song and dance number, then that kind of breaks the fourth wall in a way. And then it kind of calls into question the reality of everything happening in the film.
Yeah, it just, I think when you kind of break the fourth wall in that respect and you're calling attention to how false everything is, then the more kind of extravagant sort of stretches of reality just start to just fall apart and just not be credible at all in the world of this film. And I think that's just the case in point problem here. The sense of comedic timing in the edit and the cast interaction is also just non-existent. I can't remember a comedy in recent memory where the jokes landed with this much of a seismic thud to the point where you kind of almost feel the shock waves reverberate through the cinema and you kind of want to cringe internally so hard that, you almost break, damage your shoulder blade. There are also these eye-wateringly vapid and heavy-handed TikTok montages, and the song and dance numbers are choreographed to be like TikTok songs. Oh my God, it made me sick. And these moments were such an eyesore. It made me want to take my mobile phone, and not just delete TikTok because I have it on my phone. I don't have an account, but it's there, and just delete it. Not only do that, but douse my phone in gasoline and set it on fire. But the most baffling aspect of Mean Girls for me is for a 36, and it's not a huge budget compared to Marvel, but for a $36 million musical with Tina Fey involved, how is the recording quality of the music this poor? Like, there's nothing. No, this is a really great high bit of praise here. There's nothing inherently ear scraping about the songwriting here, despite it being profoundly unmemorable and so boilerplate in its like melodies and arrangements that you could like probably just slap it on any third-rate off-Broadway musical and it would get the job done. Like, it would suffice and it wouldn't sound out of place. But like, I was like genuinely appalled. I mean, maybe it's just because my parents have played music professionally and I could listen to music with a kind of an analytical ear as well. But even people I overheard coming out of the cinema were going, yeah, the music just sounded bad. Like, it genuinely sounds like it was recorded on GarageBand. Like, the guitars and the bass and the drums are that plastic, excuse a pun, sounding, that it's just like the mixing is diabolical. Like, the instruments are trying to clamber over each other in this, or fight for room in every song. Every instrumental just sounds like a gluey mess that's like more lo-fi than a kid's toy saxoboom. Like, I was genuinely baffled. Like, did you not have professional session musicians at least come in and record these songs? Like, Jesus Christ, what were you doing? And not to mention, the flat as hell songwriting. But there really was just one moment that summed up the experience for me and how awful it was. And that was, and this joke is new in the musical, because I Googled it after, because I was like, please God, tell me that wasn't in the original film, or at least it was delivered better. Mm-hmm. But no, this is all on the 2024 Mean Girls. And there is a moment where I realised the true depth of the atrocities I was witnessing on screen. And this is when one of the characters makes a joke about the fact that, and I quote, the fact that sex cancer does not exist. And then 8 teenage girls at a party all simultaneously slut drop in time with a massive beat drop.
What?
In the soundtrack. And it incites the party to go absolutely feral. And it was at that point that I just started to reevaluate my life decisions, particularly the one not to walk out of this catastrophe and utter waking nightmare.
Oh no.
F.
An F.
I hope I never have to sit through it again.
Ages. We haven't had an F in ages.
Cocaine Bear was the last F, and it's not much better than that.
Oh, I mean, that's such a shame. I mean, for me, Mean Girls has one of the tightest teen movie scripts ever, right? It just works. It's so clever. It's something that Mean Girls could genuinely be taught in film school and I wouldn't be mad about it. It's just a very tight script. It's Tina Fey. I'm a big Tina Fey fan. And it was interesting because I was looking at a couple of articles where Tina Fey was being interviewed and she was talking about how much of the new movie was an update from the original. And she said that some of the jokes in the original you can't do anymore. The culture's changed, teen culture's changed, which I was kind of on board with. But then it appears to me that a lot of this is still the original. All they've done is put TikTok on it and kind of taken out the bite, which is sort of the point of Mean Girls, right? Like, teen girls in a story like this, they go for the jugular. The reason why the original works so well is the offensive jokes. That's why it's one of those films that should only ever exist in 2004. Because it's kind of a film that could only exist in 2004. I think to update it, if you're going to update it. Like, update it fully. I think the problem with this is it's an adaptation not of the original film, but it's an adaptation of a stage musical, which was an adaptation of the original film. And I think we've got more watered down in every iteration. Like, this story has been absolutely squeezed of the juice that made it so entertaining to watch. So I think, I had high hopes for this. I've got a massive lesbian crush on Renee Rapp. Who doesn't? But I think, the original source, the original film, it's a product of its time, but that's why it works. And yeah, I think we should all maybe just go watch Mean Girls wearing pink and just forget that this one ever happened.
Yes, let's please God just let this one just slither down into the sewer and never see the light of day. I will instantly be interested in if you hate it quite as much as I did.
I've heard some people that have never seen that, I've seen reviews from people who have never seen the original that quite enjoyed it. I think maybe once you've had the good stuff, you never go back. It's not the same. I think maybe if this was my first introduction to Mean Girls and I wasn't aware of the great delivery of the lines, the comedy gold that came out of that original one, maybe I'd find more humour out of this kind of new edition. Because the thing is, you're expecting all the jokes as well. Like, I could quote half of that film off by heart. I don't think any of the jokes are going to take me off guard, apart from maybe that one about sex cancer not being a thing. That might take me by surprise. But yeah, interesting. That's our first F of the new year. So let's move swiftly on.
Big moment.
Swiftly on. I hope that this isn't another F. This is Society of the Snow, which I know nothing about. So please enlighten me.
Do you know about the film Alive?
No.
No. Okay, so they're both based off the same true story, except this is now an Argentinian Spanish production, whereas Alive was an American sort of retelling of this true survival story. And what an incredible true story it is. It's based around the Uruguayan 1972 Andes flight disaster, where a team of rugby players were being sort of flown over the Alps towards an international rugby match, and crashed in the Andes mountains during 1972. It was a horrific plane crash. The plane was torn apart and hit different parts of the mountains, and then the rugby team had to try and survive extreme cold for the ensuing months, and lack of food, the avalanches, the extreme weather, the lack of water, everything, the harshest of harsh conditions. And actually, and this is a very well-known fact about the story, had to eventually resort to cannibalism from, the people who didn't survive in order to, keep themselves fed and, survive the ensuing months. Just, an unbelievable true story. And I wasn't aware that this was coming out. I didn't know that there was kind of a new sort of updated adaptation of this story. But I'm so glad there has been, because I haven't seen Alive, so I'm not going to comment on that other than I'm glad that this story is now being told from the perspective of the country, and nationality of the people that it happened to. And despite this quite melodramatic voiceover narration that kind of had me a bit worried at the start of the film, the rest of the film does not take on that tone, and I was very pleased. I was not actually at all prepared for how headfirst the director dives into the intensity of the subject matter. His direction and the cinematography are amazing. The setting of the Andes Mountains, does imply a sense of visual grandeur that the film certainly has. And the widescreen captures the vastness of the valley, and also the sense of isolation and danger that the group are under, being so remote and stranded. But it's the use of wide-angle lenses and the proximity of the camera to the chaos that makes this such an immensely visceral viewing experience. The director's always driving the camera uncomfortably close into the actors' faces as they're shivering in the cold, and or trying to dig themselves out of an avalanche. The camera's so close to their limbs and bodies that they become trapped and injured. Almost these slight fisheye lenses that they're using to distort the edges of the frame, and even accentuate the size of the characters in the middle of the frame, lend the plane crash and avalanche sequences, an added claustrophobia and in intensity. The visual constriction and the frantically disorienting edit that mimics the panic of the survivors, and this chaotic sound mix bursting with terrified screams. It genuinely makes for some of the most breathlessly heart-pounding and claustrophobic sequences in any film I've seen in the past year. There were scenes almost, the avalanche scene in particular, made me sort of almost recoil in horror at just how, life-threatening this situation is and how viscerally the director was able to capture it. It's so fearlessly pressed in so closely to buried people fighting to get out of deep snow. You palpably feel the suffocating horror of these situations. I was genuinely taken aback at how harrowing these scenes were and how acutely the director plunges you in there. But, due to the amount of scenes like this over the course of the film, in a survival thriller like this, you do run the risk of either exhausting the viewer or, the film becomes kind of a thankless trauma exhibition, rather than a tribute to determination, survival, and the strength of the human spirit. But Society of the Snow and its writer-director, they clearly understand the need for that balance between brutality and humanity to make the film the right amount of palatable, but also tribute the survivors properly without sacrificing the grit of the real-life horror of the story. And it's very well structured because it very deftly flips back and forth between, moments of pure terror and destruction with scenes of cooperation and optimism, pragmatism in escaping the dangerous situation. And I think it really thoroughly achieves that balancing act of bearing witness to the pain and the horror, but also the strength of these characters, and but also like kind of ensuring the structural scenes of the script don't become apparent. Like the film doesn't take on like this overly episodic structure or anything. It's not clunky in that regard, despite the litany of issues the group encounter, and a pretty hefty 2.5. No, not 2.5 hours. It says 2 hours and 20 minutes on Netflix. 10 minutes of that is credits. 2 hour and 10 minute runtime in total. There's a continuous kind of in the moment urgency of the ordeal. It's very well sustained, and the most gruesome aspects of the story, like the cannibalism, are dealt with kind of a great deal of visual sensitivity that is very respectful and not sort of garish at all. And it, due to the nature of the story, it's very much focused on the collective experience of the survivors, rather than a precise viewpoint of any particular character. It's an ensemble piece without kind of great depth given to any individual character, but that isn't an issue here because because it was in real life an ensemble experience, and also the entire cast just utterly committed to the physical and emotional demands of the material, and the rapport they build together feels very natural and also kind of very inspiring and very just well played and very believable. I've seen some complaints of the film being way too long. I wouldn't say it's way too long. I think past the 90-minute mark, there is kind of a small plateau where maybe there's some more character moments, but I don't feel like the story and the relationships are being progressed all that much. I reckon you could have cut this by 10-15 minutes and you would have had a spot-on runtime. But even then, I still think it's well paced enough that it doesn't become a slog, and it's incredibly powerful. And I think I would be, again, can't fully comment because I haven't seen it live, but I would be surprised if I were to watch anything else and not think that Society of the Snow is now the definitive sort of telling of this really remarkable true life story. Again, very physical and very rigorous, but also very, emotive, historical kind of survival thriller. Very, very good work here. I would give this an A-. It's on Netflix.
Interesting stuff. Nice that we have a doc on the list this week. We haven't got a lot of time, so we're going to go straight on to Saltburn. Another 180. It's an eclectic mix this week, Billy, as always. Saltburn. I've got some stories about Saltburn, but I'm going to let you do your review first, and then I might chip in with some interesting tales.
Okay, so well, Saltburn's essentially kind of talented Mr. Ripley for a new age, and I kind of that will almost kind of come back to haunt the review later when I sort of talk about the pros and cons of the film. Centers around Barry Keoghan as a sort of lower class Liverpudlian boy from a struggling background who sort of befriends a very rich and upper class family kind of by meeting his son by chance at a very sort of prestigious, I believe he meets them at Oxford University actually, and they sort of strike up this bond that may be just friendly but might also be kind of taking a more sort of toxic, sexualized, or sort of sinister tone than their initial friendship potentially implies. he is invited back, and this boy is played by Jacob Elordi. And Jacob Elordi invites Barry Keoghan back to his sort of family manor over the summer Saltburn, and weird psychological, psychosexual games of power and psychological warfare ensue, and as the lower class and the upper class kind of eventually begin to battle it out and sort of strive for control of the situation. Now, a lot of people have made a lot of fuss about sort of the weirder scenes in Saltburn, and also just generally of it as an erotic thriller. I don't really think in the end it's that steamy or that kind of passionate or intoxicating as an erotic thriller. I don't entirely believe the dynamic between the central pair. I think it's just, unlike Jude Law and Matt Damon in like Talented Mr. Ripley, for example, I don't think the character interaction is, in general across the cast, is as nuanced as something like the Talented Mr. Ripley or Parasite, into kind of its sort of look at the dichotomy between the lower class and the upper class and how they sort of interact and sort of function and feed off each other, sort of this symbiotic relationship. I think in the end it's quite a surface level examination of that. And because in the end it doesn't have a lot of depth of story and theme, what it then kind of rests on is the weirdness of it, and also just kind of how entertaining of kind of a yarn, of a romp is it. And at 2 hours and with kind of a meandering sort of pace and not as riotous or as gripping a thriller sensibility as the Emerald Fennell's previous film Promising Young Woman, or as kind of radical a statement or plot as that film, it kind of ends up for me being a little bit dull. I want, there's two kind of grotesque, but also compared to other weird films I've seen, not that edgy sequences in it that have caused a lot of controversy and sort of a splash online, but really they feel like they're thrown in there to inject some liveliness into a story that in the end is kind of drawn out and doesn't really have a lot going for it in terms of emotional depth or really just raw entertainment factor. The party sequences are lavish and decadent, but in the end I just wanted this to be, I think about something like Infinity Pool and how that has some really whacked out hallucinogenic, hazy, just insane sequences in it that are kind of and a really sort of brazen, vicious story. And I just look at this and I go, it feels limp. I just want it to be more intoxicating, to go harder on the sort of riotous energy that, the plot summary implies that just really isn't on display here in the end. And I don't know why it was shot in 4:3. I wanted widescreen. If it's about decadence and lavishness and trying to critique that, why don't we sort of visually build out that idea and that motif? But squashing it in 4:3 kind of was a counterintuitive part of the direction for me. I also think the twist is really obvious. I don't know about you.
I was fooled. But I must admit I didn't see it coming, but yeah, I appreciate it. As someone who's seen as many films as you had, maybe there's a little bit more to it. Maybe a bit easier to spot for you.
I just think that there are recent films like Infinity Pool and Parasite and Talented Mr. Ripley that have done many aspects of this film's plot and narrative, and just visual style, everything. This feels like a very pale imitation of a lot of similar, much better films. And it's not terrible. I'd give it a C+. I'm kind of middling on it. Like, it was fine while it was on. It's okay. And I don't think it's as provocative and edgy as it thinks it is.
Yeah, I kind of agreed, to be honest. I had similar thoughts where I feel like this film was designed specifically for early 2010s Tumblr. Like, does that make any sense? I feel like that's
very true.
That's a perfect description for me. I feel like it was made for the Tumblr children of 2010. With the the kind of shock, erotic, not humor, but that kind of dark humor, and the homoeroticism and the murder, and yeah, I didn't vibe with it as much as a lot of people did. I found some of the stuff in it shocking, but it was kind of when you start a film expecting shocking things because you've heard so much about it, I was like, oh, ew, I guess. Moving on, I wasn't, I'm the same as you. I wasn't like fully like immersed in, oh, this is fucked up. I was just kind of like, this feels like it's been designed to be talked about, but not in a way that really it helped me to engage with the film. Anyway, I did like the twist. I thought that was interesting, and I heard that there was meant to be more of that. That Richard E. Grant's character was meant to have known the twist very early on because of the egg scene. I heard that it was perhaps a cut scene where when Barry Keoghan's character sends the eggs back for not being a certain way, and apparently Hugh Grant's character is meant to see that they actually were done that way, and to see that he actually doesn't know what he's talking about, and therefore he kind of starts to figure out early that he's not who he says he is or who he's pretending to be, which I thought could have been quite interesting considering, the unravelling of that character. There were some scenes that I really liked. I thought Rosamund Pike and Carey Mulligan together were a mood. I thought they were really entertaining in a horrible way together as like a pairing. We've already said before that I would listen to a podcast of them talking, not because I'd like anything they say, but just because they'd say some outrageous things that would be very entertaining for the rest of the world. I think very memeable content. I do have some stories about Saltburn, but I'm trying to think in my head about how much I'm allowed to say. The long and short of it is that I work for daytime television. We're talking like 6 o'clock in the morning to about 6 o'clock in the morning to around 10 in the morning. And they always ask for clips of films, especially when people have been talking about what's been on during the month, and Saltburn was a big topic, and part of my job is to get those clips from the production company and basically, what can we use, what's available to use. And pretty much all of the clips requested, I was like, have you seen the film though? Do you know how much of this is not 6 a.m. appropriate?
Or appropriate for any time other than like past the watershed?
I feel really bad for the amount of like grannies and innocent TV viewers that were like, oh, everyone's talking about this Saltburn. I guess I better give it to. Oh my god, I do feel bad for the. Oh my god, the people, the poor people that watch daytime television that watched this filth. Because it was on early morning.
What is this heresy?
Well, there you go. That's my story. It might end up getting cut. Okay, moving on to our final review of the episode, and this is Good Grief, written, directing, and starring one of my current favourite comedy actors, Dan Levy, son of Eugene Levy, who is a famed comedy icon. Really, he's been in so many different films, most famously as the dad in American Pie. I think that's safe to say, one of his starring roles. But this is his son. He made a name for himself in the excellent Canadian TV show Schitt's Creek. And this is his foray into film. And it's an interesting one. I've been looking forward to this because it seems like quite a different film than what we might expect Dan Levy to produce for us at this point in his career. But please tell us more, Billy. What's it all about, and should we give it a watch?
Yeah, so I think more dramatic and more downbeat, but also still funny than we were initially expecting from Dan Levy. I mean, I worship the ground the man walks on from playing David, as his mother would say in Schitt's Creek.
You, David.
Just an iconic character. So but I was ready for him to kind of put his heart on his sleeve and develop something a bit more low key, a bit more understated, a bit more emotional. This is on Netflix now, and I think it's definitely worth seeking out. It sort of centers around a artist and illustrator for children's books, and his famed husband, who's a famed writer, passes away very suddenly in a car accident on Christmas Eve, I believe it is, and is essentially centers around him and his two friends, played by Ruth Negga, and he is the lead in Yesterday. His name escapes me, but they travel out to a flat in Paris that Dan Levy's character finds out his husband has that he never knew about, and sort of unpacks, sort of heal old wounds, and sort of try to forge a path forward for Dan Levy's character without his husband in his life now, sort of regain his footing. Himesh Patel is the actor name I was searching for there. So I think despite the talent pedigree involved in the project, I think on paper it would be quite easy for Good Grief to be somewhat insincere, or at worst case crass and tasteless, because it's showing very privileged and wealthy people kind of wallowing in, well, one could argue it's showing wealthy characters wallowing in self-pity, disguised as a well-intentioned comedy drama about grief. Thankfully, the quality of Dan Levy's writing is a big part of why this ends up working, kind of sidestepping being a vanity project, kind of masquerading as a thoughtful, emotional portrait. It's not wrong to say the plot has the contextual surrounding of privilege, like in the characters' careers, the quite lavish interior settings, the polished costumes, but the script, and particularly the dialogue, does a very nice job of having the characters kind of lightheartedly and slightly like cynically mock each other's access to wealthy activities. They're kind of like poking fun at themselves, or other times, outright criticizing each other for acting spoiled. And this isn't delivered in greatly verbose fashion or referenced particularly frequently. We're not beaten over the head with this idea that kind of tonally registers as cringeworthy. Rich people have feelings too, sap. The humor and jabs, they aren't overly caustic or breezy in delivery to where they would kind of downplay the emotional tenderness of the story either. So I think it walks that line very nicely. And whilst I wouldn't say there isn't a ton of psychological depth on display here, there are some nice observations in monologues about how grief disrupts emotional routines, life routines, and grieving people sometimes subconsciously regulate their emotions and shift their mental focus to other ideas to distract from points that they want to avoid, fully living in or processing. There are some conversations between Dan Levy and his lawyer in the film, the descriptions of turmoil and the reasoning behind it, they do feel quite heavy-handed, and I'm like, okay, can we just dial back that, please? Can we start talking like regular human beings for a second? The themes in there don't feel like they blossom as naturally from these conversations, but that isn't true of many exchanges of the film. They feel very organic in a lot of instances. The chemistry of the central trio is really strong. They're kind of robust in their criticisms of each other, but they're also very kind of free and natural in their more casual conversations. Their dynamic is well constructed in the screenplay, as Ruth Negga is the more flamboyant and joyfully supportive free spirit, whereas Himesh Patel is the more sturdy and focused voice of reason. And they're written with enough complexity, though, that they don't end up feeling like stock archetypes either. The comedic and also more dramatic instances of friction they come up against for these reasons are they're well judged and kind of integrate organically into the conversations. They don't feel kind of artificially injected. Dan Levy's direction is solid. The camera work's got a nice, delicate, mid-paced handheld quality to it. It isn't too overt. And Levy shows some lovely kind of directorial flourishes, such as a shot alongside him in bed, then a smooth pan upwards to kind of gently emphasize the fact that, his husband is no longer there, who he would ordinarily turn to look at. Kind of the rich, pillowy, ambient synth chords and nimble piano runs in the score. They kind of make for this really earnestly moving musical backdrop, kind of tastefully accentuates the sadness and acceptance in a given scene. And I really liked that. I do feel that once the group travel to Paris, some narrative steam and momentum is kind of lost, and at times it feels as though the script is kind of clambering for events to sustain the remainder of the runtime and introduces some characters that do feel a little bit like afterthoughts, more akin to plot points rather than like fully fleshed out people. I think that to a certain degree, the polish Good Grief has in its filmmaking does prevent it from being a super raw or dense exploration of grief. But at the same time, I don't think it's intending to. And I think the certain amount of sheen the story has, it contributes positively to this gentleness in tone and the film feeling genuinely heartfelt. It's solid. It's not going to set the world on fire, but it was a really good, nice directorial debut from Dan Levy. I'm going to give this one a B.
Thank you for listening to the test screening. That is our final review of the episode. If you would like to get in touch and be involved, please like and subscribe on YouTube and also follow us on TikTok and Instagram for more test screening content. And we'll be back next week with another set of fab reviews. Thanks for listening. Bye.